Hello, welcome to February. Here are all the books I read in January and what I thought of them. So to start off, we're gonna do the fiction. I read 3 novels in January, and then we're gonna do the nonfiction. I read 4 nonfiction books, so a total of 7. I don't think I have a representative reading rate. I don't really count. I don't have a reading goal. So this is non-pressured. It's chill. Grab a cup of tea and we'll chat about some books. So to start with, I'm going to talk about the novels I read in January. So starting with Nick Hornby's Just Like You. So I've read 2 other Nick Hornby books before. I've read About a Boy and High Fidelity. And I love the way he writes. I think he writes in a way that's very accessible, but very insightful. He has great dialogue. He writes characters really well. And I feel like this was true to form with Nick Hornby. So this book is about 2 characters living in London, North London specifically, during 2016, and it surrounds Brexit. So this novel follows 2 characters, Lucy and Joseph, who are in a interracial and age gap relationship. So she's in her 40s, he's in his 20s, she's a white woman, he's a black man, and the characters navigate the differences between their respective class status and their respective social backgrounds, and also the issues that come up around Brexit. I thought that the concept of this novel is a little bit clunky, and the times where he really leans in trying to discuss the issues felt a little bit clunky at times to me. I obviously am not a person of color, and so I can't really speak to how sensitively he handles that, but it seemed to be sometimes he was a little bit mouthpiecey, or a little bit he's writing the characters in a way that feels like he's trying to discuss an issue rather than characterize them. But on the whole, I thought that the dialogue and character writing, in general, there were a couple minutes where it got a little bit stilted, but in general, I felt that the character writing was strong, and his dialogue is as good as ever. So I really enjoyed this, and I especially appreciated that I thought that there were some elements of modern life and living with phones and constant communication that I don't think I've ever seen expressed, examined quite like this in another novel. There's just a moment where Joseph, his mother knows he's seeing Lucy because he keeps going to this one house, and he's has for safety a phone tracker on his app, and she knows where he's going and can see his location. And I don't think I've ever read a novel before where a character has Find My Friends or location tracker on, and their mother knows where they're going. That's true to my life. My mother knows where I'm going for safety, but I've never read it in a novel before, and I appreciate when novels insightfully and accurately capture modern life. So I enjoyed this. A tentative recommend if a novel that captures modern life and character dynamics very authentically, or if you're willing to overlook, at times, a little bit clunky handling of issues. The cover on this, I don't like it. It needs a redo so they can have it match the other cooler Nick Hornby covers. Not a good cover. Next novel I read in January is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton, a very slim, a very petite classic novel. So I have heard this is not particularly representative of Edith Wharton's novels in general, that her other work is maybe a little bit more satirical, a little bit less sincere and emotional. I can't speak to that. I haven't read any other Edith Wharton. So this is a very simple novel. It follows Ethan Frome, who is in love with his wife's cousin, who is living with them. And it's about yearning and isolation and what being in a loveless marriage can do to the mind. So it's about yearning and isolation, and it's also deeply about what the New England winter does to the human spirit, that there's an exhaustion and a hopelessness and a desperation of living in a place that's dark and cold 6 months of the year. And I read this in January in New England. So there was an element of this that, like, the bone cold that just, like, settles into your body, and, like, the yearning you have for warmth and comfort that I felt like really resonated with me when I was reading it. I would say that this novel has a little bit of a issue where it depicts people with disabilities or health issues as like a burden, or people are living like kind of a half life. So if that's something you find like particularly upsetting, I would say this probably is not the book for you. But if you're interested in a novel that captures longing and loneliness in a really beautiful, pure kind of way, then I would say this is the book for you. I'm holding it like this because I have a sticker on the front that's from the bookstore I got it at because I got it on sale, and I'm not trying to out where I live exactly, so just gonna hold it like this. But Ethan Frome, Edith Wharton, glad I read it. Probably, I don't know if I should have read it in January, I shouldn't have read it in January. Either the perfect time or the worst time. So the final book I read in January is Beach Read by Emily Henry. You're probably familiar with this one if you're on the internet in books, but if you're not, this is a romance novel that follows two characters, one of whom is a literary fiction author, the other is a romance author, and they challenge each other to try writing a book, each in the other's style or each in the other's genre. So that's what I knew going into this. This is the third Emily Henry book I've read. I enjoy a little rom-com in the mix, and I generally enjoy her books. I think this is probably her best written book that I've read so far, and it has the best character writing. It has some of the best dialogue. The one thing I will say is that I don't think the description on the back and the description I just gave you completely serves this book. I would say it's much more about grief and like recovery than the title or the cover or the blurb suggests. It's probably the most serious of Emily Henry's books. None of them are exactly heavy hitters, but this definitely has the most serious subject matter and is the most emotional to read. I really enjoyed this. I don't have a lot to say about it, but if you like rom-coms and you like one where the characters are well written, and there's maybe a little more substance to it, a little more sprinkling of serious themes, Beach Read by Emily Henry. Particularly if you've read another one of her books like Book Lovers and you didn't think it was quite serious enough, like if you didn't think the characters were well written enough or the romance was quite believable, I think this one might be the missing piece for you in understanding the Emily Henry hype. Okay, so we're moving over to nonfiction. The first nonfiction book I read in January is A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. So this is a collection of nature writing that Aldo Leopold wrote in the 1940s, some of which was unpublished during his lifetime. And this book is a really interesting look at conservation and environmentalism in the US before the 1970s, which I knew very little about and have read almost nothing. The pre-Silent Spring environmental movement, the conservation movement. Reading this book was a really interesting experience, very insightful on what the early environment conservation movement was like. I say early, I know there was Thoreau, I know there were pre-20th century environmentalists and conservationists, but this is the earliest work of conservation I've personally read. So you can see in this book both how far the movement has come. There's very little conversation around indigenous policies around land, indigenous involvement with the land movement, which, you know, not great. But on the other hand, though, there's a lot of frustrating things in this book about how far attitudes toward land have not moved on and not evolved, and there's still elements in this book that are still very frustratingly relevant and topical. And so I would highly recommend reading this if you are interested in environmentalism, you are interested in the environmental movement and how it's developed. It's very well written. He has a little bit of a sense of humor to his writing and very evocative descriptions of things. And I really found this to be a really engaging window into a past era of environmentalism, conservation, and nature writing. So, a mass market paperback. I love a mass market paperback. I love to carry them around with me. I love to take them with me to work and read them on my lunch break. Chuck this in a bag, chuck this in a pocket. Mass market paperbacks. The next nonfiction book I read in January, I keep saying in January. The next nonfiction book I read is half arse, half ass human, by Lena Norms. So I enjoy watching Lena's videos on YouTube. I love her perspective on things like veganism, environmentalism, slow fashion, and so I wanted to read her book when it came out. And unfortunately, I think the thing is, this isn't really the book for me. I don't feel like I was the target audience for this book. So there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I think if you're familiar with her YouTube channel, I think a lot of this is a repeat of things she's already said online, which is fun. Her ideas, she's allowed to spread them in multiple venues, but I do think that if you're looking for something completely new or a different kind of insight, this might not be the book for you if you've already watched a lot of her videos. And then the second part of this, where I thought this book wasn't really for me, is a lot of the issues and things that she's talking about half-assing. I have to say ass, I'm an American, I can't say arse. It sounds silly. Half-assing are things that I either don't feel much of a pressure to participate in, or I don't find my participation in to be a burden. One of the things she talks about in the book is feeling pressure to have personal style, feeling the pressure to do wardrobe declutters and buy new trends and do all this stuff to keep up with personal style, and personal style being an invention. And I kind of just feel like I have personal style. I don't mean that to say like I think I dress really well, but what I mean is I like the way I dress. Like, I find shopping for clothes fun. I try to do it sustainably or from small businesses, and it's something I feel like getting dressed and putting on clothes like adds enrichment to my life. Like this shirt I got at a vintage store locally. It's really cool. This crew neck, which I think is hilarious, is from a small online business called At the Moment that I got this from. And like these jeans I got secondhand on Poshmark. I like my clothes. I find getting dressed to be something that's like very rewarding and satisfying, and I don't like getting rid of clothes because I'm really sentimental and I have things that I've had from middle school. So I don't, like, she's saying, oh, ditch the pressure to have a personal style. I'm like, I don't feel pressure and I don't want to ditch my personal style. It's also something she's saying about like collective wardrobes and maybe people need to like be less attached to their clothes. I'm like, girl, no, I am attached to my clothes. They're mine and I'm keeping them for the long haul and taking care of them. And there was also a section where she talked about half-ass interior design, where she was saying like ditch the pressure to have an interior design that a home that perfectly represents you, and that's like capitalism talking. I like my home. I mean, it's a rental, but I love putting things on my walls that like perfectly represent me and make me feel safe and at home. This poster I got in college at a local shop. This Waterhouse poster my mom got me for years ago. That's a Beatles Hard Day's Night poster over there. That's one of my favorite films. This tablecloth in the background, I made that. This crocheted blanket here on the chair, that is my baby, my best thing ever. I made that. It took me 6 months to crochet that whole blanket last winter. These are like meaningful to me, and I don't do this because I want my home to be on Pinterest or the internet. I say, as I put my home on the internet. I do it because like it's good for my mental health, it's good for my well-being, and I like it when my friends come in here and say, oh, it looks like you in here. I like that. I like it when I come home and go, oh, it looks like me in here. It's nice, and I don't feel it as an external pressure to do that. I think there were a lot of sections of the book that were helpful. If maybe you feel like that pressure is being put on you from something external, to have a nice looking home, to dress a certain way, to have houseplants. I like houseplants. I have a houseplant over there. I've more on the windowsill here. I like houseplants. I don't feel like that's a pressure that the world is putting on me to have houseplants. I like them. I like them. And I know she's not saying don't do these things if they bring you joy, but it felt like, I'm gonna liberate you from the burden of caring about the things you care about. I'm like, but I do care about them. I do care about them. I do, Lena, I do. And it made me feel like a little bit defensive. Like I'm not the target market for this book. I did like the section on half-ass veganism. I agree with her idea that in general, it's better to just limit the amount of animal product consumption you do, rather than worry about labels and purity and doing it right and being a good enough vegan, being a perfect vegan. But there was one section in the book where she talked about how cheese has a bigger impact than meat, and I looked it up and I found no research that supports that. Every piece of research I saw either said that it had a lower impact than all meat, it had a lower impact than all meat, except for chicken, or that chicken and dairy have the same impact, or like none of them suggested unequivocally that dairy has a higher impact than chicken. So if you read this and thought, but I love cheese, that is the one animal product I consume, me, basically, that and all better pastries. But if you were thinking, but I don't want to give up cheese completely, I want to half-ass it and still have cheese in my diet, you can do that. So the thing about this is, if you read the description and you haven't watched many of her videos, this might be for you. If you are listening to me talking and you're saying, but I do feel pressured to have a nice looking home, or I do feel pressured to dress a certain way, and I feel like I need to constantly redo my wardrobe, plain. I do feel pressured to constantly redo my wardrobe and put a little pressure on how I dress and follow trends and that stuff. This might absolutely be what you need, but I felt it's not quite what I need. Sorry, Lena. She's doing great work. I don't mean this to be like an anti-Lena video. I think her videos are really, really helpful. I love her slow fashion journey she's been on. I love the way she talks about veganism. She's very smart, she's very funny, she has great taste in books. But I think this book was just not quite for me. And that's okay. The next nonfiction book I read this month was The World She Edited by Amy Redding, or Amy Reading. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. So this book is about Katherine S. White and her editing career at The New Yorker. It's a pretty hefty biography. So Katherine White, if you don't know, she was an editor at The New Yorker for most of her life, for 50 plus years, and she was also married to E.B. White, the children's author and essayist. He wrote like Stuart Little and Trumpet of the Swan and Charlotte's Web, and he also wrote like the essay collection One Man's Meat, and together they were kind of a literary power couple. This book is a biography of Katherine White. It tells the story of her whole life, starting from her birth and early childhood and going through to her death in the 1970s. And it also charts the evolution of The New Yorker as a magazine, because she started working there 6 months after it was founded and worked there until only a couple years before her death. It also charts the literary career of E.B. White and their relationship as two creative people, an editor and a writer in a long, loving marriage. This is a really great book about women in writing in the 20th century, if you want to know about career women before the second wave feminist movement, if you want to know about the development of The New Yorker and sort of literary culture in New York. It is exhaustively researched, beautifully written. It's very thorough, it's very detailed. I wouldn't call it a light read. There's a lot of names and there's a lot of dates, but at the same time, it is engaging, it is narratively compelling. Amy Reading does a great job at building a narrative through line out of this woman's life and keeping you engaged and tracking all of the details of her creative development as an editor. And one thing that you'll come away from this book understanding is that being an editor is absolutely a creative act, and that an editor is really a creative partner along with a writer that helps a work get made. So this book made me appreciate The New Yorker more, made me appreciate Katherine White, who I'd only very briefly heard of before, made me appreciate E.B. White more, although one of the reasons I appreciate him is that he seems to have been continually having severe anxiety problems his whole life and still managing to write classic children's literature and great essays at the same time. Highly recommend really beautiful, really engaging book. The final book I read this month was Heartbreak is the National Anthem by Rob Sheffield. So music writing is one of my favorite genres, and Rob Sheffield is one of my favorite music critics, music writers. His book, Dreaming the Beatles, is my favorite Beatles book, and I've read a lot of them. That's saying a lot. And he writes about musicians in a way that is passionate, enthusiastic, precise, observant. He's a fan, and he's not afraid to show that, but he's also a critic, and he has a great ear, and he pays attention to detail. He's just a fabulous writer. So I'm not a big Swiftie. I am what I call a Taylor Swift agnostic, in that I understand that people love her, but I'm not one of those people myself. The book has brought me the closest to being a Swift fan that I'll probably ever be. He dives into album tracks, he dives into her evolution as a musician. So I would say read this book if you don't understand why people love Taylor Swift, because it made me understand why people love Taylor Swift. And read this book if you do love Taylor Swift, because if you love Taylor Swift, I imagine reading this book is like how I felt reading Rob Sheffield's Beatles book, which is to say you're in the room with the most articulate, enthusiastic fan you'll ever be in the room with. You'll have a great time listening to the music together. Highly, highly recommend this book. It's small, but it's mighty. Rob, you've done it again. And that's all the books I read in January. As you can tell, I usually try and mix up genres. I try to read nonfiction and fiction both. I read everything I read because I'm interested in it. I read for fun, I read for education, I read for enlightenment, I read for lulls and good times. So I'm always looking for new books, I'm always looking for new authors and genres, and I will be reading the rest of this year. So come join me as I read in 2025.